you have an entire podcast called What is Money? And I think that's actually the right place to start this whole conversation about Bitcoin. What is money? Maybe we should ask that question to you. What is money, Robert?
Yeah, I think it's the natural next question, right? You say, what is Bitcoin? The typical answer is, well, Bitcoin is money. And then the natural next question is, okay, well, what is money? So, one, I guess this is sort of start at the end in a way. Like, one thing I've learned on this journey of doing the What is Money show is just how limited language is. Like, we're dealing with a very complex, fluid, continuous reality. And we're dealing with it with these little discrete data packets called words that we put in different arrangements to paint pictures, to try and describe the nature of this complex adaptive system that we all inhabit. And it turns out most of our disagreements are over broken consensus on terminology, right? I say a word and it invokes one meaning in your mind, and I'm invoking a slightly different meaning in my own, and we have an argument and disagree about what the meaning of that word actually is. So not to get too far astray, but it becomes very terminological was kind of the point, that you get into words, we get into definitions a lot. We're trying to say, like, what do you actually mean when you say that, right? We're trying to reach consensus on big questions like, what is money? And it turns out that question is fundamental in some interesting way. It's almost like asking, what is truth? What is beauty? What is justice? What is love? These very fundamental, essential concepts that also have huge definitions, right? People have spent centuries writing about them, and it's still kind of an unsolved thing. There's many definitions that work, et cetera, et cetera. So when you ask me the question, it's like, all right, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is money. Okay, what is money? It's like, well, I've now spent 400 episodes attempting to answer that question, and I have more answers and questions than ever, actually. Like, I've accumulated many answers from many guests. I have more questions about those answers, and there's not a very bright, clear-cut definition. So with all of that lead in, let me just say, any answer that I'm going to offer you today, the document that I think I have over 50 answers to the question. So I can't enumerate them all from memory, but I'll try to enumerate some useful ones. You could always start with a very simple one, which is just what the Austrian economists have defined money, which is as a universal medium of exchange. And, most of your audience probably knows this, right? Indirect exchange is just more efficient than direct exchange. There's a problem where if you're trying to trade goods for goods, chickens for potatoes, well, there's always the problem of, does the guy that has potatoes want the chickens, and does the guy that has the chickens want the potatoes? And if not, you have the non-coincidence of wants problem. So they can't trade efficiently or effectively. They have to find an intermediary to facilitate the trade. It makes trade very inefficient. So money becomes like the intermediary, or the intermediate of trade itself, the mediator of trade. So the medium of exchange. And in that way, it's just like an economic lubrication in a way. It just makes exchange much more efficient. So it lets us economize much better, right? We can calculate, negotiate, and execute trades much more quickly when we're trading through money. And then it also gives us this ability to think in terms of money. Instead of thinking like, oh, this chicken costs 32 potatoes, or this potato costs 1/32 of a chicken, you can just denominate all of it in money so that everyone speaks one common language of economic numeracy, and it's a universal language in that way. So, which gets to another definition of money. Money is like the language of value. So that's one answer to the question. I guess two answers. It's a universal medium of exchange, and it's a language of value. Now, when you say language of value, that's kind of interesting, because then the question is, okay, what is language? Well, we're all today running the open source software called English, right? I create patterns in my brain that turn into patterns in my vocal cords. You guys get the pattern on your ear and you decrypt it in your brain. We're all running the same software, so we can transact concepts basically through the medium of English. that's a very useful tool, obviously. It's what distinguishes us from animals. It's intrinsic to thought itself, right? Like our internal dialogue is facilitated by English. So language being the medium of exchange of human conception, right? That we have certain ideas or concepts that we're assigning words to.
Hmm.
And again, this is a social consensus process, right? Like whatever definition is in the dictionary is a pretty strong representation of what the social consensus of the meaning of that word is. So this thing, the concept is independent of the word itself, right? You could say the dog is dead in English, in German, and in Japanese. These are entirely different auditory patterns, obviously, the way we say it. Obviously, different, it invokes different neural patterns, but it invokes the same concept, right? The same image. Oh, the dog is dead, right? You could see the dead dog. So it's this tool we're using to convey our concepts through a medium, right? So language is the medium of exchange of human conception in the same way that money is a medium of exchange for human action, like things that have actually been done, work that's actually been done in the world, favors that have been rendered into the marketplace. The entrepreneur has solved problems for consumers and he has earned money or profits. He can now take those profits in the form of money into the marketplace and redeem favors from other people. So that's when I say language of value, that's me expanding on that definition a little bit.
That's fascinating. So money as a language of value. I've heard much more about the kind of the medium of exchange, but the language of value is I wouldn't say completely new, but the way you phrased it is somewhat novel to me, and I think that really fits, right? So it's kind of a protocol in the way that language is a protocol, and then of course, just as we have English. That is only one of many languages, right? We also have the dollar, which is one language of money. And we also have Bitcoin, which is another language of money, which we could talk about. So we have different languages. One thing that's fascinating to me about language is it's very much a social consensus technology. I was actually having a conversation with my youngest kid yesterday, and we're talking about words. And she was saying, "Well, that word isn't in the dictionary." And I said, "Well, how do you think words actually come to be?" And she's, well, the dictionary, right? It's like, are you sure about that? So like I could create a word right now, a new word to define something. And if I get enough people to believe that word, to say that word, and to socially consent that that is the definition of that word, then guess what happens?
Yeah.
Webster comes around and all they do is index it. So
That's
who
right.
created the word? It wasn't the dictionary. It was some individual actor who mimetically spread this particular word, and there was social consensus that elevated it to the dictionary. And the dictionary is just an indexing system for language. And I think money works the same way. I love that you called it like English software, because money is like software too. And I suppose anyone can submit a push request in GitHub and update the English language as well at any point in time. Yeah. Do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I agree with you. First of all, the dictionary is a lagging indicator of evolution of natural language, right? Like words will spread via memetics, via social, well, it ultimately becomes a social point of social consensus where enough people are using the word that the dictionary says, hey, let's include the word, right? These are, what are these called? Neologisms, right? New words. I can't think of it. Maybe woke is an example that came up recently. Like, I guess woke's always been a word, but now it has a new definition, right, in the dictionary. We
I
get
mean,
a
the
lot
word
of these.
Bitcoin. The word Bitcoin meant
Bitcoin's
nothing
a new
probably,
word. I
20
was
years
just going
ago.
to say a lot of these neologisms come from technological evolution, actually. Like when we get, like the word software, for instance, 30, 40, 50 years ago was probably not in the dictionary. I don't know at what point, but it comes into our common lexicon after it becomes like a technology that we actually use and we have an experience with. Now, we do have many different natural languages, but there is a difference with money. I think it's more like mathematics almost, in that there's a huge advantage to having a single universal language. Like in mathematics today, we all use the Hindu Arabic numeral system, the zero-based numeral system. And there's a massive efficiency gain to be had by all of us using the same mathematical system, in that it's the most efficient way to use a protocol. It's almost the purpose of using a protocol, right? It's a common rule set or a common grammar that we all subscribe to. And if you have different grammars or different rule sets, there's always translation frictions, errors, cost, etc. Which we would, in natural language, we call this a language barrier, right? If you're in a workplace and you're the only guy that speaks English, well, that makes you a lot less effective of a worker relative to what language is being most widely spoken. So although we'd say money is a language of value, I think it's more like mathematics in that it tends towards like a winner take all marketplace. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that it's very much a product of social consensus. So you could say it's a social construct, perhaps. It depends how you define social construct. When I say social construct, I'm invoking something like the calendar, right? Like it's this imaginary tool we use for human coordination. It works to the extent that we all agree upon it. But the slight difference with money is that money is also rooted in physical reality in the way the calendar is not exactly. Like we're observing the motion of the planet and the moon and the sun, and we're overlaying a calendar on it, but it's not rooted in physical reality. Whereas something like gold or Bitcoin, like the expense necessary to produce a new supply of the money, to expand the supply, is like an actual physical restriction on the monetary protocol itself. And that's what safeguards savers from artificial debasement. So it's like language, but I would say it's more like math, less like natural language. I would also say it has its rooting in physical reality, which sort of distinguishes it from natural language. This means that spoken language is very low cost. We know this. Talk is cheap, right? Put your money where your mouth is, as we say. When you send someone money, it's a very high signal message. And again, we know this intuitively. Actions speak louder than words. Well, capital at risk speaks higher than actions, because capital at risk is the consequence of many, many, many actions across time, right? Especially if it's a lot of money or a lot of capital. So those would be just the caveats, I guess I would add around the metaphor of money as the language of value.
Going back to ancient times, if we will, I think there's a parallel of the development of language and the development of money, in that if I can assume that if we went back thousands of years, the languages that we spoke as humans were probably much more blunt, much more imprecise. And as humans discover new words to be more precise, the technology of language improves. And as societies come together, different languages are spoken. And then over time, one language tends to dominate when two different societies come together. The arc of history is fewer languages over time as globalism has increased. Now the world tends to kind of just be dominated by two major languages, right? English and Chinese. These are the ones that are growing the most. And they're probably also growing in their precision. We're finding more words to use to discover more precise ways of expressing communication. And I think the arc of money is pretty similar. We had blunt tools of money back in pre-recorded history, like cowrie shells. We had inferior precious metals that were used to express value. And then later we discovered over time that, well, actually gold is the best precious metal, after we tried nickel, copper, bronze. And then we discovered, well, gold is the one that wins. And perhaps the answer as to why gold won is rooted in physics, as you alluded to, and in the difficulty of making new gold, which is impossible. And so I think the arc of language as a software and the arc of discovering better monies also trends forwards in history. And this is something that I think people, when they come into the world of crypto, they need to get their brain broken that, well, actually the money's not the dollar. You thought that it was this static thing that you were born with and were raised with, but no, it's a technology that is in flux and adapts. And yes, Bitcoin as a money is not used in the same way as the dollar, which is also a money, but it is a money nonetheless. And I think that's perhaps the first lesson that any new crypto person coming into this industry always learns is like, it's much more, it has always been in flux. Money has always been in flux, and it's in flux right now. And that is the crypto revolution.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent point. one way I've used to describe this, and I didn't, this is not my original thought. I don't even know who said it, but you could think of money more as an attribute than as a thing. So if you read Minger's on the origins of money, he describes it in any trading society, there's always necessarily a particular asset that is most widely tradable or most liquid or most marketable. These are all also definitions for money, like the most marketable good. And whatever that asset is that's most liquid, that's what everyone will want to trade for, right? Because no matter what you're aiming at obtaining, the most liquid asset will be the fastest way to get there. If I can trade chickens for money, I know that everyone accepts money, or most people accept this most marketable good that will help me get potatoes or whatever the thing is most quickly. So money emerges naturally as a result of trade. It's an emergent property of direct exchange itself, that something becomes the most exchangeable thing. That most exchangeable thing is then by definition money, effectively. So it's important to understand that. And then assets that are less liquid, they just have less degree of moneyness, right? So when you hold an asset with the intention to consume the asset or the good, or to use it as capital, right, in the production process of other goods, that would be an industrial use demand. You actually intend to either consume or use that thing to produce something to consume. But when you hold an asset with the intent of trading it in the future for other assets, that is reservation demand as money, right? You're holding the thing for a monetary use that's non-productive, non-consumptive. So there's kind of this bright line, right, between the moneyness of the asset, which is your intent to use it in exchange, versus the good capital or good, which I summarize as industrial use. Many people call this intrinsic value. I think it's the wrong term because value is subjective. You just say industrial use. You're either going to consume it or use it to produce something to consume. So what is gold? Well, gold is the asset that had the most moneyness of all the other assets, whereas something that is super specific and non-liquid, I always give the joking example of purple telescopes. You know, it's not a widely demanded thing. It's just so specific. There's very few people that want it. Probably has a very low degree of moneyness. And then you could look between gold and purple telescopes and you'll see a whole spectrum of moneyness across these assets, right? Like something like water would probably have a lot of moneyness, pretty widely demanded. We all need it for survival, etc. However, it doesn't make it great money because it's in such high supply, right? You want something that's relatively scarce to other goods and services, so it'll hold value across time. So when we look at gold and we say, okay, to your point, yes, money is always changing, right? What is that most tradable asset? Well, it's been a lot of different things. It's been glass beads, it's been cattle, it's been salt, it's been different precious metals. There's always the common example of cigarettes in prison, you know, like cigarettes exhibit these qualities that make good money in a limited context. And so one of the most critical answers to the question, what is money, that I've stumbled upon, and this is from Gary North's book, Honest Money, the late, great Gary North. It's a free PDF on Mises.com. I highly encourage everyone to read it. It's the principles of money and banking told through a Christian lens, but Gary has a brilliant way of distilling complex ideas into simple language. It makes it very easy to digest. And he narrows down the 5 properties of good money, or he narrows down the properties of good money to 5. And I've gone into detail many times on what these are. People could check this out on other podcasts. So I'll just name them here without going into depth, unless you guys want to. Gary makes the point that people seek a money that's divisible, a money that's durable, a money that's recognizable, a money that's portable, and finally scarce, as we said.
These are like the table stakes of money.
These are the
money.
Qualities that market actors seek in a good monetary technology. Like you want the asset that best balances these 5 properties or attributes or qualities. And, you know, to gloss over a lot of history, basically of all the things we've experimented with as the best tool for the job, monetary metals were the most divisible, durable, portable, recognizable assets in the world. And then of the monetary metals, gold was the most scarce, meaning that its supply curve was the least flexible. Like gold is basically indestructible, so every ounce of gold mined across history which is rumored to fill 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools today, is part of the existing supply. So basically all the gold we've mined ever is part of the existing supply. And we're only increasing the supply of gold at an average of, say, 2% per year over the past several hundred years, right? There's little pops. There's like the South American bonanza. It'll go up a few percentage points for a few years and it comes back down. That basically meant gold was the most reliably scarce or most predictably supplied monetary good, which meant it was the best asset for preserving purchasing power across time. So in a nutshell, that's why people favor gold, right? And again, if money is like a mathematical language, it's very much winner take all. There's huge advantages to having one protocol versus several. That's why gold became gold. And then you could import the Bitcoin argument here and say that, oh, that's what Bitcoin is basically doing. Bitcoin has run and won the race for digital gold. So for the same reasons we had one analog gold, we're going to have one digital gold, and that is Bitcoin.
To continue leveling up your crypto game, then you need to get on the Bankless newsletter. It's the world's most popular crypto email and is completely free. Just click below to sign up.